Welcome to today's 5+5 repertoire testing video. We have white against a 2358, so once again we are pushing the upper bounds of opposition. So bishop b5 against the Sicilian is our feature move. Knight d7, I believe, is where, do we have to play c3 to be ready for the a6 and b5 stuff? I want to say that sounds right. But also I know that we normally castle first, so I don't know that we are supposed to do that yet. I'm just thinking maybe it's just bishop d3 in this line. But I think as a rule we're castling first before we work up to c3, d4. So let's start with that. And yeah, because of that, I think that does make sense. So a6, not bishop a4, because b5 and so on will trap the rook. And I believe when we are protecting this pawn, as a rule we say it's rook e1, except for the line where they've played bishop d7, then we would play queen e2. But this looks like we should come back to this same place. They can still play b5, but then we're at time to play c3 and tuck back on c2. Exactly. So let's get on with that, and probably straight up to d4. And then there are times you can break into black's queenside structure with a4. That's touched on a couple of times in their repertoire. It's never trainable, it's just as a comment. Yeah, e5 tries to clamp down on d4, but I don't know how good a job that does. I definitely could still push, but I would anticipate they ignore it, or maybe take with the c-pawn, but not take twice. I feel like we are definitely playing d4 at some point, so let's not waste time with that. Yeah, so ignoring it. So do we want to turn right to a4? They play b4 or ignore it, I guess either way. I know sometimes we could play the knight around d2 to f1. I don't know if we want to develop this bishop up to g5. But I actually want to trade that. I'm not inclined to say so. And I don't think it helps to take either of these pawns, so I haven't really considered that. I am inclined to say it should be the knight first, because they still won't take on d4. I'm sure they will just castle. So we will continue around with the knight. And I don't know if I'll have a chance to get in knight h4, f5, because even right away, something with like knight takes c4, I don't know. This is very Roy Lopez, and I've never been a Spanish player. So I'm a little out of my zone of expertise. I guess knight g3, f5 would be the other way to do that. Sure, let's do that. Try to capture this bishop. I imagine rook e8 in part is so they can play bishop to f8, and also to open more pressure potentially against e4, yeah, but the knight on g3 does protect that pawn, so that's okay. I don't know if I want to play d5, if that makes sense, because they're very clumsy on their king side now. So it kind of feels like it shuts down some of their pieces, but I'm not certain how I would follow up either. Like, if someone's getting a pawn break, where would it be? Like, I think we'll start with a4, since I've been talking about that. Make them answer that first, and then I'm not sure. Okay, I don't think I want to take, because if I have to play rook takes, the a file is probably not that useful, but I still don't want to give it to them. Do I want to play d5? How does that go badly for me if I do that? Could start queen e2, target the b pawn. They might want to play rook c8, try to come after this bishop on c2. Why don't we start with queen e2? I don't think there should be anything tactical on the e-file unless there's like some crazy d5. But I would have to imagine that is fair trades rather than material losses. We'll be aware of that. And c4k. So trying to lock things down. I don't believe we ever want to play a5 because the knight probably comes around, picks off that pawn. It's hard to play b3 because c3 is so weak, so I think we will want to create some kind of play on the king side or center, because I think the queen side is kind of lost to us now. So maybe just bishop g5, try to trade it off a piece. Because I want to develop this rook now, and that's going to be to d1. If we take on e5... I think their pawn on d6 is worse than my pawn on d4. So I don't think it makes much sense to take on e5. I wonder if I can try to start some kind of attack, like knight f5, h4. Because they've drifted a couple of pieces to the king side, so that stops the knight move. But we start with this rook. Is there a downside to that? Maybe a little. How about h4? Is there much of a downside to h4? Try to play h5. That could be promising. I think I'd be fairly willing to sacrifice a pawn if it opened the g file. I don't know if I would ever throw in d5 first. No, d5 I think is bad because it's going to give them knight c5, so I don't think we want to move a pawn off of the square yet. So do I want to prepare, or do I just throw? And I'm still being careful about this pawn. So I could also switch to like queen d2, bishop h6. Maybe that's a slightly safer version. We aren't committing to h5 just yet. Now that they've played this g6, bishop g7, gives us an opportunity to trade bishop for bishop. This is still very well protected on e4 by 3 of my pieces, and they haven't tried to open the board anywhere. But it is a closed, tense game. Not the kind you get a lot, I think, at lower levels, or if you tune either side especially knows what they're doing. I know I spend a lot of time saying we prefer open positions at a post-beginner level. Okay, attacks a4. I don't think that really bothers me, though. Could switch to d5 now. Could take and play h5, but I think I'd really rather trade that bishop as opposed to the knight. I don't know what their knight is really planning. Like, taking on a4 doesn't concern me. So I'd be thinking maybe they want to play rook d8. But I'm pretty sure I'm okay with that. I'm thinking like if they could try to get in a b4, but not quickly. Okay. So there is this, which I think we're always taking. It does remove one of my defenders of this center pawn. But now I'm thinking, do we take first or play d5 first? I think it's one of those two, stops bishop c6, so I should be able to grab this pawn. I think I just want to make sure my queen is free to move. But my main point is not rook takes a4 right away. Ah, no, that might work. So if they take on d4, I can play queen takes, and then I'll protect this pawn again. So I still don't have to commit to d5, although it's probably decent. But I think I really would like to have queen on d4, but I also think this sort of controls their bishop better. Makes it harder for them to get on a different diagonal. So we'll do this, and then we'll still argue that I can come after this a4 pawn without too much difficulty, and maybe this c4 pawn becomes a weakness. Again, in part because their bishop has a harder time getting to b5. And maybe that could also include the a pawn then. Like if it comes around to d7, then that pawn loses the bishop protection. Probably abandoning the h5 idea. Okay, so that would threaten to protect the pawn, so we kind of have to take it. Yeah, I don't think we can really delay. And sadly, I don't think I can play rook b4 because of a5, so let's go rook a2, just make sure this pawn is protected. Knight on g3 still protects e4, let's not forget that. Maybe actually queen e2, knight d2, and that could lead itself back to h5, but I don't know if that's to my advantage. Or conceivably queen g5, but I think just h6 always kicks the queen back before some kind of knight check. Wouldn't mind trying to push in an f4. This is a position I would love to spend a lot more time on. Okay, I think we just want to protect the knight. But that's okay, because I was planning to move my queen anyways. Play knight d2. I wonder if I could have just doubled rooks and let them take this pawn. But it's a little hard to say. If the tempo is more valuable than my pawn quality. Okay, let's start by piling up here. If it ends up they take the b pawn, that probably means giving up the a pawn. So yeah, let's try this, and maybe let's try to play f3. I'm a little wary of opening the second rank. I think we're okay with that. I think I would like to open a line towards their king. Okay. So yeah, why don't we go through with that? Yeah, I think we'll do that. They can't play pawn takes because queen g5 actually wins the knight. And knight takes, pawn takes. I mean, at minimum, queen g5, and regain the pawn right away. If they do this, do we ever play h6? We could. I think I like the look of h6. It'll give us a mating motif later on. And I think queen g5 makes their knight a little bit uncomfortable. So let's do that. And I'm starting to think of motifs with, well, not starting to, coming back to motifs with knight f5, knight g5, but I was thinking queen d8. But that would lose c4. And if they have to play knight e8, that's where I'd be looking at, I think, knight h5, try to play knight f6, but then there's queen d8 on the next move. So what about knight f5? I'm okay with bishop takes and maybe knight e7. Is that crazy? I don't think that really does anything, unfortunately. Okay, well, let's do this. There's no f6 because we take it. If they take on b2, I think we ignore it. It's hard to say. I want to say they have weak pawns. Well, they definitely have weak pawns. Like d6, c4, a6 are all potentially vulnerable. I just don't want to give up too much material as I'm trying to collect them. I don't love this knight being... That's unprotected, I guess. My queen is still here. But I think this is difficult for them, because knight f6 check if they don't play queen d8. They can't just move their king either, because like king h8, we take the knight, queen f6, queen g7 is mate. King f8, I could take on h7, and then this is a passed pawn, so probably queen d8, and then what's so bad about that for them? Because I was disappointed that I'd have to move this knight again, but then I think I can just argue this is a weak pawn on c4. I hope. Like trade queens, retreat the knight. I don't think I see anything better, because I'm not playing knight g7, I think. And I'm just giving up the h-pawn for no reason. I also don't think queen g3 right away really helps me. Actually, then I think they could move their king and my knight would just be trapped. As long as their knight, I guess, guards mate on g7. I wonder if I could try to open stuff with like f4 again, but no, I think we'd have to trade queens, and I'm not sure if they don't see it or if they don't like it for some reason. Queen d8. But I'll get to play a couple fast moves at least if they do come up with that. And they don't go for it. Okay, so I think we want to give this check. I'm not entirely convinced of that, but I think I like it because it threatens mate on g7. So they move the bishop, yes, but now can we just take a pawn? It's unfortunate I can't get one of these rooks over to the attack. But I think my position should definitely be good. Do I have better than grabbing a pawn? Yeah. Maybe knight e4, knight f6 becomes dangerous for them. So let's get this check so that they can't block with queen f7. And then jump in with the knight. If rook f4, I was thinking f3. It's pretty solid. Their bishop is out of play too, so I'll have some time to come around. Or actually, rook f4, how about rook e1 right away? And then try for rook e3 and then make a problem out of that. Okay, f2 pawn is protected. So yeah, let's start with the rook. It's still dicey and we are into a time scramble now, but they still have to stop mate on g7. Why don't we just bail out? That might lose the h-pawn because of rook g6, so I don't really want to do that. Yeah, rook e1 protected the knight. That's really good news. Very tense. Ugh, fine. I don't see better. I'm just getting nervous about the time. But now, at least they have the d6 pawn a little bit weakened with this other rook moved. So I knew this was giving back a pawn, but I just wanted to release a bunch of the pressure. So we need to figure out the rook on e2 versus the bishop on b5. I think I'm okay with rook h1, because I want to loosen this d6 pawn again. And their bishop, again, will have a lot of trouble getting back into the game, because if it ever moves, then we can take on b5. I don't think we want to go into this. I think we have to protect f2 first. But maybe they're being a little careless with this pawn now. Okay, I guess rook d7, and then, yeah. Then I'm just annoyed that my b2 pawn is weak. Can I do anything about that? Not immediately. I think I'd want to get my king up to e3 is probably a good square. So that will kind of help me do that. And I think I should be slightly better. Like, this bishop is really bad. Yes, that's partly why the rook is moving. And I don't want to move my rook because then they can move their bishop. That's the annoying part. But what can I attack? Because I don't want to ever really play b3 and release this bishop the other way, do I? Can I slowly get my knight to b4 somehow? That's a really long path. Shoot. Well, we'll try something like this. I'm going to argue if they move their bishop, I can play knight d2 and attack c4. But I'm having trouble coordinating my three pieces. So maybe we can play g4. The downside of that is I like the way things stand. So I'm a little disappointed to change the character this way, but I am still kind of trying to win. And I would like to argue that my rook has some chances of infiltrating, but if they play king g6, I'm not sure that's actually true. But I think they probably should have played king g6, because now we do get in. Rook a7. Yeah, I think rook a7. Rook b7. No, rook b7 has to be better. Because bishop moves and then rook b6, and we should be winning the d6 pawn. And then after that, the knight might just chomp on a bunch of pawns. Like, everything is lined up really well, even if I lose d5. So this looks like I might be winning now. Because my knight, basic endgame stuff, can attack pawns, and their bishop cannot. So nasty discovery threatened. Rook would lose the knight. So am I just taking a pawn, but then I lose d5? No, I think this is simpler. Because then king up, and we're definitely winning another pawn. Or maybe not definitely, rook e8, but this is very, very good for white. Then yeah, just don't blunder all my queenside pawns. But I think rook b4 and just pick up the last couple pawns probably works too. I don't think they can really get after b2, Can I block with the rook? That might be... No, because then I play the rook to b8. Let's do this. Yeah, they can win one of the pawns, but I'm going to say that's completely fine. So let's take one. My rook is always protecting b2, so I can just move forward with the c and d pawns, and they shouldn't be able to stop me if I keep my rook on the b file. We can just inch our way forward. Okay, I could throw in a check, or I could play... Yeah, we'll do that, because otherwise maybe rook f6. I mean, that's fine. I can trade rooks without a problem. Be slightly inaccurate about how we're doing this. We are allowing king c8. But that's okay. I do believe that 2 pawns should be able to win this. I'm not sure what that's exactly about. Maybe they want to play a3, but my pawns are pretty far advanced. So we're going to get a mate threat coming up pretty quickly here. Like a3, d6 probably wins. Yeah, and they don't see an answer. So yeah, a3, d6 threatens rook b8 mate, and king c8 doesn't help because you can play d7 check, king has to go back, check again with the rook, and then the pawn will promote. So alright, that's a pretty big win against 2358. Our rating looks like is crossing 2300 for the first time, so that's cool. I don't know how often I say it, but my usual ratings are in the 2500s, so have been lagging a little bit behind as the rating has still declined. But opening-wise, I think this is how we're supposed to play it. These are some pretty familiar ideas. I don't think I look specifically at e5. It's probably like e6 and g6 that I'm thinking of, but up to here I'm pretty sure we've done this correctly, and then we're kind of always trying to break with d4, sometimes with a4, and we'll just have to see, like, how did this maneuvering go between white and black? Because things were pretty frozen on the queen side until they came up with this idea with their knight. I didn't feel I was necessarily unhappy with it. I wasn't sure what I was evaluating this position as. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little better for black, but I don't think bishop g4 was necessary. I think they could have just tried to play on the b file, but even in saying that, like, I was aware, and I explained a couple times during the game, that these are weak pawns that I can try to target. And the way they come up with in the game, like bishop b5 to protect them, is just very passive. And then I tried to combine that with threats on the king's side as well. Like, I know it's happened to me a couple times playing against strong players, but you get this pawn on h6 and black just always has to be scared of some kind of checkmate. But even up to here, like, if they just play queen d8, I really don't know. Like, what am I missing that makes this unsafe for black if they play queen d8? Because I can't play knight f6. They have 2 pieces on that square. Trading queens, like I said, doesn't really help me. Can't move my queen just anywhere because this knight is hanging. So I thought we would trade queens, queen takes, rook takes, knight g3, and then I'm not sure, maybe they just thought they were losing a couple of pawns or something, but I think f5 has to be worse. Like, they aren't losing material instantly, but they did lose a pawn, like, pretty quickly, because they have to move this bishop because of mate on g7. I was kind of expecting bishop e8, actually. I'm not sure why or if that's any better. It at least wouldn't be getting in the way of their rook, so they could still have some threats of rook takes b2, and it's not like they need to defend their back rank, they just need to defend g7. I guess it would have ruled out things with rook g8 that came up later in the game. And then, yeah, like, their king's wide open, so I'd really just like to get more pieces in. I can't play knight e4 right away, so I think we do want to eliminate this pawn. We are just grabbing a pawn, that's fine. I was not inclined to play queen e6, because they play queen f7. And I kind of have to trade queens at that point. I felt like it was just helping them bring their queen to where it's probably coming anyways, so that's why we chose the other check. And it was just a little tough, because if I trade queens, then I probably just lose this h6 pawn no matter what, which I did in the game. But I was too low on time to think up anything particular. Like, there aren't really tactics, I think, with like a knight takes d6, queen takes e5. They can always block on f6, so even though I'm controlling g7, that's okay for them. And then, yeah, they were able to get their rook and queen to do something. Threatening mate, not a big deal. Is there anything around here? Like, I still can't take on d6. I would love to give a check on f6, but I can't deflect their queen. e3 doesn't do anything anymore. I'm not sure. So we'll see what computer says. And I felt like I was reasonably happy with the endgame. I figured at worst this is equal, because again, this bishop is just really not a good piece. It takes too many moves for it to attack the couple of things that I have on light squares, and it has to protect this pawn on a6. So I wonder if they could even play like, they can't play rook b7, because yeah, now I'm attacking this d6 pawn. Now that everything else is traded, it's just the knight is attacking that pawn, and it has to be defended by their rook. So I didn't take it right away, because I thought losing f2 would be a bad trade for me. So then their rook is really active, my rook gets stuck trying to protect b2, which looks really bad, my king is stuck on the back rank. Just much easier to play king g2 and slow play this pressure. And then as I described, it's how do I activate this rook, and can I do it without their bishop really coming to life? Because if I'm trying to figure out where is my rook supposed to go, I don't really have an answer, which is what I was struggling with in the game. I like that my knight is tying down their rook. So we just start by improving the king, tried to do something to improve the rook, which, like, it worked. And I thought a5 was bad. I thought if they play king g6, then that again answers the question of how do I actually improve my rook? I can't right away. I can give another check, but then they just go back, and I don't really see a way forward, I guess. Maybe I could have given like a knight check, knight e6, but then I'm not attacking this pawn on d6 anymore. So what's my knight actually doing here? Attacking the rook is very superficial if it just moves. I could argue something with knight c7, but I really don't think that's a good score for the knight. I think this is probably its best outpost, because black can't attack it, and we are attacking that biggest weakness on d6. And I will mention they couldn't play king f5, because rook g5 is mate. So I was halfway hoping for that, but they did avoid that pitfall. But then the rook gets active, and I think this probably wins already. Like, the pawns just become much more easily attackable now that my rook can join in, like, no matter what they do. Bishop a6 is the same. I'm threatening rook b6. I decided once and for all this is the most important pawn, and I think it just kind of collapsed after that. Didn't really want to take on c4. I think rook takes probably defends both of their pawns, and maybe we're not totally clear that we're winning that position. But I thought that with knight takes f7, and I'm sure I have other moves too. But I thought that my king could just come up, win the e-pawn, and then at minimum I should have 2 extra pawns, and it's hard to see their rook really activating. And again, it's really helpful that my rook protects this base on b2, then that holds up their remaining pawns too. So I don't think I have a lot to add after that. They can try their best to get the king in front, but it's just too slow. So let's take a look. This is probably already a longer video, so thank you for sticking with it if you have to this point. So as always, we can start by checking our Sicilian repertoire. So we got one with d6 and then knight to d7. So definitely less popular than bishop d7, but perfectly playable. And yes, we do castle first, and with a6 we do play bishop d3. I have a note, you can trade on d7, but if we can keep the bishop, we might as well do it. They may not have played, knight f6 right away, but I think we transpose to this position, if I am not mistaken. So we play through that, c3, bishop b7, bishop c2. Did we get to here? Not quite. I do have e6 included. I think what we're seeing is that it higher... No, that's not right. What are we seeing here? Maybe bishop b7 just transposes, or is supposed to transpose, I guess. Did we get to e6 soon? No, we got e5. That's right. That was the big thing. I think I already said that, is that normally they would play e6, not e5, even if we played bishop b7 first. This looks almost like what we had. Yeah, we're supposed to play rook e1. So this is the position we had in the game, which, just to quickly confirm, rook e1, of course. And then, we just don't cover e5. We talk about e6, which would have given us d4, very similar to the game, and I have to imagine e5 is the same. But that's as far as the repertoire took us. So we were correct up to here, and let's see how it reads e5. Not as good for black, it looks like. Evaluation picks up just a little bit, because d4, I'm maybe going to argue we have 2 places we can capture. I'm not entirely sure what our evaluatory differences are between e6, d4. see if I misplayed anything as this continues. There are probably going to be a bunch of mistakes both ways, just from the nature of a maneuvering game. And okay, it does like d5. I was thinking about that at a few moments, but I never wanted to commit to it. I want to say we've seen this in one of our games already. I don't know if it was one that I ended up posting, but maybe one of the very first games, actually. Like game number 2, I think. I think there was something like this where I was supposed to play d5, even against the Sicilian. But I was not willing to commit to that, so yeah, this is the kind of thing. It'll show up a couple more times, I am sure. Yeah, if I want to try to explain why is d5 good, what would I say? Because I know the one moment I rejected it, I think consciously during the game, was we're a little cautious of letting a knight come up to c5 once this pawn is moved off of d4. That could put more pressure on the e4 pawn, which isn't really a problem, but I think we're just going to argue that we can get in a b3 and cut into this pawn quick enough that it works for white. Maybe this looks like a strong pawn, but we are able to attack it with b3. But we just kept not wanting to commit to that, I guess. So we'll round that all into one mistake, I think. Whatever. This is now 5 or 6 moves in a row. But we're still doing okay-ish. Don't love that it's come all the way down to equal. And queen e2 is a mistake. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to spend a ton of time on these either, because it'll take me too long to puzzle out, I think, in a way that is interesting to you as a viewer. But I think we might be saying that we're starting to get to a point where there might be a lot of pressure on white's center if black is coordinating their major pieces as well. So we probably do want to commit to this, but again, if we play c4, this is a really hard position to judge, I feel. Especially when, as I've said, I have no experience in Spanish-type positions, which is what this has really turned into. But their move is supposed to be c takes d4, and yeah, playing on the c file. I definitely talked about this bishop on c2. I didn't consider it would actually be difficult, but I think the problem is it's combined with this pawn. Like, I can't protect the bishop where it is, but if we play, let's say, bishop b3, then we run into an issue here, where they have their 3 pieces attacking, and the queen is not well placed to defend that pawn. I'm not entirely sure if that becomes that relevant. I see a couple captures on e4, but could have been uncomfortable for white if they had fully maximized that way, but they kindly closed it for me, and then, sure, I'm still supposed to play d5, but we did not. h4 was a little optimistic, but queen d2 should have been played on the move before. Okay. Yeah, it would be a real effort to go through this too finely, so I maybe speed up a little bit here as things have turned towards me. So we've talked about this already a little bit in the pre-game. I'm interested that h5 is supposed to be so much better. Like, it's normally a reflex against if white plays h4, black plays h5, and we just agree those pawns aren't going anywhere, and try to argue whose king side is weakened more. But knight b6, yeah, it's just kind of the wrong direction. Their attention should not be on the a4 pawn, and for the moment, at least, I do have this opportunity. And naturally, the one time I do play d5, it is a mistake, because that is how my chess usually goes. Interesting to note that knight f5 is playable right away. I think that's, again, because if they take, then queen g5, it's a mini tactic to win the knight on f6, so it wouldn't be worth black opening their king that way, but then they're stuck with kind of an awkward defense with knight h5. This is, again, hard to assess, but d5, of course, turns out to be a small mistake. Why is rook takes, then, that much better? Because the game, if they play bishop c8 anyways, how is this flexibility useful? Still kind of hard for me to say, so we're going to continue and see if we at least were able to convert with reasonable effectiveness. I didn't like bishop g4 that much, so I'm happy to see that wasn't perfect for them. We pile up as best as we can, and yeah, we kind of get what we wanted, which is this knight d2, and we finally start putting real pressure, I think, on these weaker pawns, and also we get going at the same time with this kingside action. So it turned into best of both worlds. I did miss knight takes c4 works because this rook is attacked by my queen, so they can't take my knight, so I could have grabbed that right away, but h5 is also quite good, it looks like. I'll show it, I guess, one time. As pawn takes, queen g5, and they can't protect this knight. Just kings and knights don't work right for that. h6 is very good, excellent. So that was good for long term. Again, just creating this net around their king that is always very difficult for them to defend. Even knight h5, so I was stumbling around a bit in that middle game, but once we got some kind of initiative, this turned out a little better. So f5 isn't as bad as... well, isn't as different, I guess, from queen d8, because queen d8 itself is not brilliant. Takes, and I was thinking I would just move the knight g3, which is okay, but again, I kind of missed, we can grab this pawn right away, because it attacks the rook, and then we can save our knight, and we have won a pretty important pawn on c4, and it'll take some time, but we should definitely be very pleased with that position. Is there much else for me to comment there? No, just that I think I would have done this, and then felt like I was okay here. I'm not sure I was quite as optimistic as a plus 1.5, but I did like my position, and I got into there. And what are our choices here? Knight f6 doesn't maximize our attack. I was down to, under 10 seconds, so I was starting to play pretty automatically, or I've probably been doing that for a little while. So we could take on f5, a6, could even take on c4. And then you can play knight f6 after that, so that's sort of instructive to the way the game was going. So if they take with the queen, knight check, we're threatening to take on d7, but they really can't take the knight now because they just get mated. Their queen has been deflected from ever being able to defend g7. Which again is another point to this h6 pawn, is we saw that their queen was really tied down in defense. So we let it slip a little bit. Not too badly yet, though. This is still really strong for white. Knight comes forward. Rook we tried to bring around. I don't think I understand rook a5 very well, why that's showing up here. We actually take on b5. Trying to deflect some pieces, just force one of the rooks in on the a file. That's unexpected. Queen e3 makes more sense to me with how the game went, that I was a little awkward with how I was supposed to handle it, so it can just come back, attack this rook. But I want to explore this for a moment. Let's say rook g8, queen comes back. No, just take on b5. Okay, and then we would just be arguing their king is really terribly placed in the corner. Rook takes b5. I don't think that's a move many of us would play. But something like this, the other rook comes in, and black is just completely boxed in. This knight on e4 is like a really good piece to defend. We can always play g3, I think, like we did in the game. That's very odd, so we will continue. It's still around +2, which is great. We could actually play rook e3. Okay. But I bailed out because I was a little nervous being low on the clock, but we are still pretty comfortably better, so that's good to see. I don't think, again, I was quite this optimistic playing it out, and rook h1 probably makes it more in line with what I was thinking. What else are we doing then, if not rook h1, just starting to push the pawns already? King g3, it looks like it wants to get in. I'm not totally sure what our end goal is again. We're thinking really basic about use king, attack pawns. We're attacking one pawn. I need to get a rook to do the same thing, but I didn't have an obvious path towards that, so I don't know if their king just comes out of the corner. Where are we going with this? Like, okay, we've slowly improved our position. That's a good little habit, but how do we keep going? Okay, one. We just want to be able to take with the rook, I guess, and not lose time with our king. I guess that makes sense, although I'm not entirely certain of why the difference is so large compared to the way we played it in the game. Like, you can definitely see that the way I played this in this demonstration is, I think, not a single move has been wasted, which is good, as opposed to this and moving the king back and forth, but oh, because rook f3 is supposed to be an opportunity, and that might let them activate their rook finally. So if you remember, after king g7 did not take this because I figured rook takes f2 would not be great. I don't know if I would have called it as better for black, but either way I was never interested in that. So they could sort of try something similar by playing rook f3 and then rook to d3 and have hopes at least of attacking my pawns from behind, or of course they're attacking this pawn on d5 right away, which I can't really hold on to, so we end up trading these, and then I really need a solution for this rook, and ideally one that does not involve losing the b2 pawn to something with rook d2. Okay, so that is more specifically it. It's not so much that it was slower, it's that we left one little gap where they could have activated a rook through f3. But failing to do that, we got to reassert control, start improving pieces as best as we can. How viable is this g4? Pretty good. Okay, I knew I needed a way to activate the rook, and this does look like it was correct. But then we were getting a little stuck here. So with that in mind, I think f4 you can almost come to by process of elimination, because our king and our rook and our knight are about as well placed as they can get. So what's left would be to play f4 and try to bully a path in for either a king or an alternative for a rook, I think. I don't think we would take this pawn, let them take, and then open their rook on d5. But I do like that I'm seeing, yeah, a couple of f5s. Turn this into a passed pawn, and then we can see a path forward for the king. And at that point, I think white would be able to coordinate very strongly, especially with black still tied to the defense of this weak pawn on d6. So I think that's a good takeaway, is this f4 and really force a way in for all of your remaining forces. Once you get rook h7, yeah, I was very optimistic from here. We can just pretty simply start attacking pawns, pick up one or two, trading is good enough, and I don't expect it will show me any more flags. Get some passed pawns and start pushing them. And yeah, I guess the last point would have been if they had played rook, or not rook a3, a3, I definitely would have played d6, I think. This threatens this mate. If they go this way, that's not going to help them because they're getting out of the way of the passed pawn, and this is the mini land that I mentioned a long time ago, is that we get to promote like this. Okay, so what are our takeaways for the game? Well, I think most relevantly to you, if you are studying our opening repertoire, is we know we're supposed to work up to this c3 and d4, and I mean, up to here, this is as much as we could ask for from our repertoire, but what looks like the big takeaway is we are in fact supposed to play d5. We have had, I think, a couple of games now where that has been, it seems, a positive theme for white. Block the center with d5, and then maneuver your pieces around the blocked center, which I think I can justify now, as well as it does secure slightly more space for white that will have a pawn that's crossed center. And I'm not sure exactly how much else to say it. I would have to play, I think, a couple more games in this kind of position before I really start to get a feel for it. But outside of not playing d5 a whole bunch of times, I think this was a fairly good game. Definitely not perfect, but I did enough things well that I think I'm reasonably happy with how the game went. And then once I did have a surefire advantage, I don't think we let it slip after this point. Or I guess we had our one moment we did, but otherwise I think it was a pretty good demonstration of being able to attack stuff while black just can't. And yeah, again, they had their one little moment to try to do that here with rook f3, but they missed it, and then, once again, it's just strictly white who is attacking until eventually it all breaks. Okay, so we will leave our game there. Thank you for watching our Sicilian today, and we will see you for another game soon.